So one of the main questions I get from natural bodybuilders and those people training naturally is, should I be using creatine to help me build muscle and get that really impressive physique? And is creatine responsible for my being able to go from being 125 pounds to realizing my goal of being a successful natural bodybuilder? Now, here's the problem. Yes, there are tons of studies out there that talk about the fact that creatine may help increase muscle mass. But unfortunately, in all of my years, I have seen many studies that talk about a particular protocol that's supposed to increase muscle mass that in the real world simply doesn't work. The other problem is the majority of the fitness influencers who talk about how fantastic creatine is tend to be using drugs. And those people who use drugs, I'm not exactly sure if what they're doing applies to someone who's a natural bodybuilder, as it's hard to tell whether it's the creatine that helped them get bigger and stronger or the drugs. The other problem is the reality of the fitness industry. As a bodybuilder or a personal trainer, supplement sponsorship is pretty much how most people make their money. And so no one wants to ever say anything bad about creatine, because since almost every single major supplement company out there makes some form of creatine, it would destroy all chance of sponsorship and trying to make some money from affiliate marketing if you said something bad about creatine. And that's where I come in, because I'm someone who will never endorse any form of supplementation or any product whatsoever. It's just not what I do. But I also have about 27 years of experience with creatine. I was there when it first came out. I used it for many, many years, and my clients have used it as well. And I have a lot of information as to whether it works or not. And in this video, I'm going to share with you my unbiased findings about what I have really seen in terms of, does creatine really work for natural athletes? So stay tuned. Let's talk more about this. So in this video, we're talking about creatine for natural bodybuilders and for those people training naturally. Does it really help build muscle mass? But before I go any further, thank everyone for tuning in, especially if you're a one-stop place for anyone training naturally without drugs or supplements. Thank you so much for all the continued support, and do be sure to like, subscribe, and hit that bell so you're first line to get new content as it comes out. So creatine, does it really work to help you build muscle? And I'm not going to keep you in any suspense whatsoever. I'm going to go right into my own personal journey with creatine. So first off, I went from 125 pounds to 198.5 pounds growing up in Trinidad without almost any supplement whatsoever. Back then, creatine did not exist. So I'm going to start by saying that creatine was not responsible for my initial gains. However, when I came to the United States, creatine had just hit the market with this product called Phosphagen HP. And my training partner and I were really enthusiastic about the idea of using this new supplement that, number one, was natural, and it was something that was also naturally occurring and something that your body makes. So it wasn't like you were taking something that was potentially dangerous, like all those ridiculous pro hormones that came out later that I never took. Here was something that actually did look like it might work. And so I bought one of the first products on the market, and I started using it. I did the loading phase, then after that I did the maintenance phase. And what did I see? Well, it was difficult initially to figure out what I saw, but my weight did go up. In fact, I was 247 pounds when I first started using Phosphagen HP. And I remember that because it was when I started using Phosphagen HP that I finally went over 250 pounds to my heaviest weight of all time at 250 pounds. Now in the gym, I felt stronger and I was really enthusiastic also about using creatine, but I also had a little bit of misgivings because it was very high in sugar. The idea being if you took in sugar with your creatine, it would help increase creatine uptake into the muscles. And maybe it did, but I didn't feel comfortable with the idea of drinking something sweet every single day. And the loading phase was quite a lot for someone like me, who even back then didn't really consume processed sugar. And so I faithfully took notes of every single workout I did, how I felt, how I looked. And at 252, I didn't exactly feel my best or look my best, to be honest. And it was at that point that I had my first competition here in the United States. And one of the first things my coach told me to do was take all supplements out, including the creatine. And so for my very first competition 3 months later, when I looked the very best I had ever looked in my entire life, I was not using creatine. And it was after that first competition that I decided against going back to using protein shakes because I didn't like how it made me feel. And I also didn't like how the creatine made me feel. But there were other creatine brands on the market which didn't have sugars, and I was going to try those and see if it worked. And so I did. I kept on using creatine, taking, again, meticulous notes of how I was doing until I went to see my physician, and there was a bit of a problem with my creatinine levels. They were a little bit on the elevated side. Now, creatinine is used by physicians to figure out whether or not your kidneys are functioning normally or not. And if the numbers are too high, it could mean that there's something wrong with your kidneys. And since there is a potential for creatine to increase creatinine levels, out of caution, my doctor told me to stop using creatine and we would test again to see whether or not that was the cause of the higher creatinine levels. And so after using creatine for about a year, I stopped completely for a 4-month period because my creatinine levels are still on the higher side. And look for a video about that one of these days soon. And back in those days, like I said, I was taking meticulous notes of every single workout I did, everything I ate, what I looked like day by day. And here's what I found after a year of using creatine when I stopped. My strength stayed exactly the same. My weight stayed exactly the same. In terms of any differences in how many reps I was able to get while using creatine in certain exercises versus not using creatine, there were no differences whatsoever. And as far as my appearance was concerned, I didn't look any different. And it bears noting as well that I always stopped using creatine at least 3 months before every single bodybuilding competition that I ever did. And equally important to note, when I was filling my natural bodybuilding DVD, I was not using any creatine whatsoever. And so at no time when I really looked my best was I ever using creatine. And after 4 months of not using creatine and looking over my notes, I wasn't exactly sure if this was something I should be spending my money on. And my determination was that creatine was not something that was necessarily useful for me in terms of building muscle. There is some water weight gain that some people experience when they use creatine, and my initial use of the very sugary version of it did make me put on some weight. And I did really feel pumped and stronger when I was using it, which actually should be expected by someone drinking a sugary drink every single day. And that feeling of being stronger and more pumped didn't actually continue long term. But I can't in good conscience discount that as not being a placebo effect, because long-term use didn't show any appreciable differences in my ability to build more muscle as a natural bodybuilder because I was using creatine. Now, there were some studies back then that showed that some people don't necessarily respond to creatine as well as others. And so the natural bodybuilders who I was working with who were using creatine, I never advised them to stop using it, as it's always a bad idea to take your own personal experience and think it's going to work for the general population. But here's what I found. Over the years, those who were using creatine didn't look any different, weren't any stronger, and didn't make any more or less progress than those who were following their diet and were consistent with their training. Now, there we're talking about a statistically large number, but we can see a statistically large number in the natural bodybuilding community. When creatine came out, everyone started taking it. In fact, I don't think there's any natural bodybuilder today who's probably not using creatine on a regular basis. And as someone for whom natural bodybuilding has been part of his life for the past 30 years, I can tell you as someone who's been a competitor and a judge that there was no increase in the quality of physiques of the average natural bodybuilding competitor, male or female, when creatine became commercially available. Now, there were some supplements on the market that did create a difference in how natural bodybuilders look. And look out for a fascinating video about that coming up in the very near future. But creatine simply wasn't one of them. And I think it's extremely important for a controlled experiment perspective to always look at the natural bodybuilding community, as it's the average natural bodybuilder who we should always be using as a benchmark to know what really works for those of us training really hard, trying to build muscle without using steroids.
Facts.
And unfortunately, because the general public doesn't pay enough attention to truly natural bodybuilders consistently competing with credible natural organizations in competitions that are tested, most of the information out there comes from those who profit from the sale of creatine or fitness influencers who use drugs. And as an aside, I know for a fact that there are a lot of fitness influencers out there who talk about creatine that they use and other supplements that they use. And I can tell you honestly that they don't use anything but steroids. Like I said in the beginning, honesty is a big problem in the fitness industry. And so most of what you see out there is more marketing propaganda than looking at large numbers of individuals and seeing what actually works in the real world with natural athletes. Now, that being said, here's the weird part. I use creatine every day. And you might ask yourself, well, Kevin, why do you use creatine every day if you just said that it doesn't work to help you build muscle mass? Well, like I said before, one of the things that I do is take copious notes of everything that I do and how it affects my body. And one of the problems I've always had, especially after really difficult leg days, is muscle cramps. Muscle cramps at nights after a really hard workout have tortured me for years on end. And one of the things that I found from using my notes was that when I was using creatine, I didn't have any cramps. And when I stopped using creatine, the cramps came back. And so I put a 5-gram maintenance dose into my diet to see whether or not it would make those cramps go away. And sure enough, they did. And I've been using it ever since. But like I said before, I don't see any physical differences or difference in performances when I'm using it. The only difference I feel is that I get less muscle cramps at night. And sure enough, when I looked at the literature, there actually were findings that it does stop muscle cramps. Now, there's some other benefits that creatine is purported to have in terms of like neurological benefits and such, but I can't say much about that because I always focus on what I have seen personally myself and with those who have trained over the course of years. And I always stay away from conjecture. But the bottom line is, should you or should you not use creatine for building muscle mass? First off, it's obvious that you don't need creatine to build muscle mass and an impressive physique naturally. My greatest gains came at a time when creatine wasn't even commercially available. And there are dozens of natural bodybuilders who I've worked with all around the world who look fantastic and built remarkable physiques. And they had no access to creatine whatsoever. So you don't necessarily need it. And what I will say is very, very important as a natural athlete that we believe in ourselves, that we don't engage in magical thinking and expect some powders to give us these miraculous results, because they can't. There is nothing out there that works better than unprocessed foods, consistently clean eating, and exceptionally hard work over years and years and years. And you have to believe in yourself. You don't have time or energy to focus your beliefs in anything outside of yourself. You need to believe in you, your hard work, and what you've done. And like I always say, the problem is that when people start taking supplements, they work harder because there's money on a particular supplement that they believe in. And because they believe in it, they work harder, they get results because they're working harder and they're more conscientious of their diets, and they credit the supplements for their gains instead of the hard work they put in. So be very careful about that. And for those who've been tuning in for a while, they'll know that my whole life mission is based on the idea of to whom much is given, much is expected. And because I was able to get so much information about something like creatine over the years, and because also growing up with a natural bodybuilder without much information about how do you really train naturally that wasn't based on marketing, it's my duty to always take what I've learned and try and share as much as possible. And I hope that what I've found over these past 30 plus years helps you on your path and helps you make the best decisions going forward. So thanks for tuning in. Know I believe in you. And as always, Excelsior.